Mr. Vikas Bijaj from the New York Times, who I think does some of the reporting in his paper that James, you said, should be getting done. At least that's the impression I have. Vikas, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Nainan. I'm going to not speak as long because I think a lot of the points I was going to make have already been made on this panel and the previous panel. I like the book. I enjoyed reading it. I finished it last night. I think one of the sort of thoughts I had after finishing it last night was that to some degree the problem with this book and problem with all books of this kind is that to some degree they preach to the choir, and that they will fall on deaf ears as far as not just people like Jean Drey's is concerned, but also the target audience, I think, for this book, which is policymakers, which I think is what you want to, or not just policymakers, but also people who influence policy influencers, if you will. And that, I think, can be rectified with not too much surgery on the text. I think one of the things that I've realized in my almost 3 years reporting from India is that oftentimes we don't really try to find out the other side of a debate. For instance, during the FDI retail debacle, I went up to Jalandhar to try and figure out, because in Punjab there has been actually active development of the retail industry, and particularly Walmart, which our readers care about a lot in the US. And Walmart has opened all of these best price stores, I think 4 or 5 in Punjab now, where they sell to retailers. And so I went to the Walmart I went to the best price in Jalandhar, talked to retailers there, talked to wholesalers and farmers. What I found was interesting is that the retailers actually were happy that Walmart was there to some degree, because they were getting supplies much more readily than they would get when they dealt with wholesalers, or in most cases they wouldn't be able to deal with a Levers or a P&G themselves because they were too small. So they would have to go through some level of middlemen, sometimes 2 or 3 levels of middlemen. And so they were happy that Best Price was there, because if they wanted Ashirvad Atta, it was always available. It might have been slightly more expensive than the discounts that suppliers will offer when they have too much supply, but they could always get it. The big concern was that a lot of business owners would also shop there for their homes. So they were upset that among their own fraternity, people were breaking the rules and buying for not just their businesses, but for their homes. The wholesalers were mad as hell, and they were the ones making the most noises. The band that was called that one day was primarily a wholesaler band, because the retail markets in Jalandhar were open that day, but the wholesale market was closed, and there was a big effigy, and there was about 100 people, and they were screaming and yelling, and when I went there, they surrounded me and proceeded to tell me how Walmart was evil and had already ruined their business by about 50% by opening their wholesale store there. So I think it's kind of interesting that it's not even so much my sense from those two conversations between the retailers and wholesalers is that the retailers are not actually the ones that are going to be hurt the most. It's going to be the wholesalers, and in each city across India, there's several wholesale markets. So in Bombay, we have Kalva Devi for cloth, we have the Mandi in Vashi for food, and those are the guys who are really going to be hurt. And it's a very small group of people, but they're very vocal. And I think what happens in Indian political and economic dialogue is that those voices often get heard. And then the last group of people I talked to is farmers. And the farmers were very interesting because they, by and large, seem to be very excited about this. But they weren't very vocal. They weren't very well organized. And it seemed to me that, if you were actually making the case for reforms, that you would build a constituency of, say, farmers or consumers. Consumers is probably much more difficult because they're so diffuse, and the benefit that they would enjoy would be, of a 10% lower price and a slightly better shopping experience. So, but I think in that instance, there could have been a lot done to sort of take on board the farmer sentiment, and that wasn't done. And I feel like that's something that you could sort of try to address in a book like this, is the constituency that would benefit from reforms, and sort of bring their perspective into the text in a more aggressive way than has been done, because I feel like that hasn't been done enough. Another thing that I think would be interesting is to do some state-by-state analysis. We mentioned some people mentioned Gujarat and Bihar and a couple of other states, Orissa and so forth. How have the development trajectories changed for these states after they've implemented reforms? When I recently did a story on the labor market, in which Manish was featured, and I read several papers on the labor market. One which dealt with the state-by-state changes in labor laws, because a lot of labor laws are controlled by the states. And that there have been, part of the reason that Gujarat has probably had industrial development is because they've changed some of those laws. I'm not exactly sure because I didn't look deeply into Gujarat, but that would be an interesting, examination if that could be brought into the book to show that these changes are not just theoretical and it's not just do as we say and you shall reap the rewards, but this has been done, or at least partly done in some places, and rewards have been reaped, and demonstrate that in a more sort of concrete way for readers and policymakers that this has happened. And then I think I'll leave the issue of Gilded Age. I think it's been debated extremely. I think it works really well as a vehicle or as an instrument to demonstrate the power of certain segment of corporate India, and puts it into perspective, historical perspective. But I agree that there are a lot of differences there. Also, one of the things that I felt like probably could use a little bit more sort of historical context. I mean, it almost seems to me that we want to read a little bit more about why Indira Gandhi turned so far to the left. I mean, I think a lot of us know this story, but it would be nice to have a little bit more texture in that section of the book, so that it doesn't come across that all of a sudden we had a tyrant imposed upon us. But how did that happen? Why was she pushed to the left? And why was Nehru Fabian socialist to begin with? It doesn't have to be a lot, but maybe a couple of paragraphs. And then lastly, on this question of malnutrition, it struck me that if the World Health Organization standard, or the World Bank standard, I can't remember which organization, but if that reference sample is indeed incorrect, why don't we have an Indian reference sample? Let's take the 100,000 best nourished kids in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, and then compare it against that. And what would the numbers show if that was the case? That if we use, what I mean is that if we use those as a sample, as a reference sample, as the benchmark sample, that would be an interesting thing. And lastly, what Sunil just mentioned, I've been talking about this with people whenever I meet people in the policy communities, like, why aren't there more experiments? That, one of the perhaps suggestions in this text should be, okay, don't reform everything at once. Don't even reform like phase one and don't even do phase one. Just give us 2 districts, and let us do. We'll do a control group and we'll do an experimental group. One group we will provide PDS grain, and one group we will provide cash transfers. And then we'll do this for a year, and take 2 districts that are very similar in the same state perhaps, and just say, let's just run this experiment. I mean, experimental sort of economics has become all the rage in the profession. So why not try this in a real way? I mean, perhaps the policymakers won't let you do it, but it seems to me that would be an interesting way of sort of cutting through some of the debates, the endless debates that we keep having over these issues. Thank you.